are talking about male toxic masculinity, I suppose it's called. And do you think boys need lessons on how to avoid toxic masculinity?
Well, that was the conclusion of a recent report by the Commons Women and Equalities Committee, as there are growing concerns that influencers like Andrew Tate are preying on boys who lack role models.
OK. Some people might argue that boys are becoming too feminine. But what is toxic masculinity? Join us today, Fran Foley Winston, who believes that toxic masculinity does need prevented.
And the actress Divinia Taylor, and regular on the programme, who thinks there's nothing toxic about being masculine. Explain
that one to us, Divinia.
Well, I mean, I'm a mother of 4 boys, and I embrace their natural instinct to go out, play, have a row, fight, play rugby, and generally when they have an argument, it's over and done with. They seem to exert a little bit of aggression and then it's done and dusted. And I think that's a skill set that often women don't have. I harbour resentment, I can get in a mood, and my boys just seem to have a problem. It's dealt with and then it's done and dusted. And I think that's a skill that I wish I could embrace and not harbour resentment. So I'm very worried that the word toxic masculinity is a little bit focused on boys when we should be focusing on toxic behaviour as a society. It's not just boys' fault. I went to an all-girls school and I can assure you there is toxic femininity as well. But it's toxic behaviour. We've got thousands of years of misogyny to unpick. And if we start alienating boys because they're just masculine, this is where the likes of Andrew Tate gets into their psyche. You're creating a vacuum of zero identity for little boys who will, particularly if they're vulnerable and don't have a father figure who's sensible, he'll be able to get into their psyche, and that's where the manipulation starts.
Oh, OK. Well, let's bring in Fran then on all of this. Do you think then by educating kids about the kind of toxicity that's out there, that actually you could make them vulnerable to people like Andrew Tate?
I don't think so. And as Divinia said, we have thousands of years of misogyny to unpick. So there's a bit more going on there for men than women, which isn't their fault. It goes back centuries, but it is there. And they do need education on it. Like even just the other night, I was at the Def Leppard Motley Crue gig, and Tommy Lee literally has women bare their breasts for him in the crowd. He shouts it out, and the men were loving this, and some very young guys. And people were videoing this and everything, which causes a whole host of other problems, obviously, in terms of putting inappropriate images online and what have you if they share them. But they all thought this behaviour was perfectly normal. He's a 60-year-old man, and there were girls in that crowd of 16 and 17. You know, like, that's ingrained behaviour in him that probably wouldn't be there if he'd had a bit more education about it. And even when I was a kid, my brothers are 364 days younger than me. They're twins. I know, my poor mother. But we're so close in age. And my mother died when I was quite young, so it was my dad bringing us up. And they were given more freedom than me. And the excuse was, it's different for boys, which is just a coded way of saying that boys are going to treat women badly. I've met people that I dated when I was a teenager subsequently who now have daughters, and they're all apologetic because it's different now that they have daughters. But that shouldn't be the case. They should just have been respectful and nice. But you can still be masculine. I have nothing against masculinity or femininity. There is just something more ingrained in men. As it's thousands of years of misogyny. It's not just a recent thing.
But not all men, Fran.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's not. It's not all
men. Should it be schools that are teaching this, though? I think teachers really want to just get on with teaching their chosen subjects like science, like PE, and to put this overburden and over responsibility on our education system is really, it's actually opening a Pandora's box, because teachers are not social workers. That's where the funding and the education needs to be for children who are vulnerable, who don't, like I said earlier, have father figures. The education system is buckling. Teachers are leaving in their droves because they are not equipped to handle the actual awful, no boundaries with the sexes at all in their schools. I mean, it's quite okay. It's, for me, what it's looking like is if you're a little boy, you are born toxic, and the only way you can reverse that is to transition into a girl. Meanwhile, girls are getting cancelled. There seems to be no real culture that we can stick to. It's a very strange time, and I really think the burden is on teachers. It's just far too much, and we are losing real talent in the education system because of this.
And look, I'm a mum of a boy, and I share your concerns, this idea that all boys are born with this original sin, and, you know, everything they do, they're malign little individuals, and I don't accept that. My little boy's a sweet little thing. thing. But equally, Fran, teachers are educators and it is their role and they are the front line in all of this. And I was hearing a report recently where children were handing in their homework with MMAS written on the bottom, which Andrew Tate had been telling them to write, which is make me a sandwich. And it was this kind of like subliminal to female teachers. It was a subliminal misogynistic kind of put down to the teachers, make me a sandwich, get back to the kitchen, don't be in the classroom. They're at the front line. Teachers are encountering all of this toxicity that Andrew Tate is pumping out. So the kids send that
to a female teacher, you submit your homework and you sign it, MMAS.
Yeah. And people are paying a fortune to be indoctrinated by this guy, and it's the teachers that are seeing it in the classroom.
Well, if you give them detention, you mightn't see it for too much longer.
Wow.
This is it. And I was actually speaking to a teacher. I'm not far from Blackburn here, and she's been in the education system for 20 years, and she's resigning because they have no power. And children like that are clearly in a vulnerable situation at home, and they have no sort of avenue to alert the services because there is no funding there. Children who are easily manipulated are clearly vulnerable. Children who are identifying as cats clearly have something going on in their home life that needs to be alerted to the authorities. But there is no place for they simply cannot get the attention of social services to help these children. Again, what I'm saying is this isn't the teacher's fault. This is something wrong with the social care system, and that's where the gap is.
Fran?
But it's not just the teacher's fault, and I do agree, like, not all teachers will want to teach this. But I know, some teachers actually do specialise in child behavioural things as well. There can be teachers specifically specialising in this that could teach it, because it's a life skill. If they leave school and they're writing that on a work report, that's gross misconduct. So it's not as simple as, oh, they're doing this thing now. It goes on into their further life. So the best time to not ingrain it, that sounds exactly like what Andrew Tate is doing, but to teach it to them is as children. And if I was a teacher and I got that, I'd be horrified if a male student was saying, make me a sandwich. I'd be horrified if a male friend of mine asked me to make him a sandwich, unless I was making it for myself and it was while you're there.
Well, that's the polite.
You understand, you're not a teacher, and they are dealing with actual self-harm within the classroom. Children are actually cutting themselves post-pandemic, and that doesn't even get the attention of social services. So this certainly will not. There is something really wrong post-pandemic with our children, and it needs to be addressed on a higher level, not just an assembly on toxic masculinity. This is just putting a plaster over something that is really paramount and very dangerous in our system.
Fran, you strike me as someone who I don't think would tolerate male toxicity around you. Were you good at spotting it when you grew up? And what I'm really getting at is should lessons not be given to girls to actually say, this is unacceptable, don't have this in your life at all, if they can't recognise it?
To be fair, most of our mothers do tell us this, but like many women, I have been in an abusive relationship. You would think you'd be good at spotting it, but it's a whole different subject. I've written a play about it, but the way that they ingratiate themselves into your life before becoming abusive is a whole other debate. But it's not just, I think the argument about what's going on with children is different to the masculinity thing, because the masculinity thing has been going on for centuries. And yes, children do need help post-pandemic. I've seen friends' children struggling as well. They're having difficulty socialising because they were basically locked up for nearly 2 years and told not to hold people's hands or give their friends a hug or whatever. And that does need to be addressed. But that is a separate issue to toxic masculinity or just men being basically disrespectful to women because they've been brought up to think that it's okay.
Guys, absolutely amazing. Thanks for raising so many subjects there between yous and getting us to think of things maybe in a different way there. Fran, Divinia, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.